if it works.
So it says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
And we're live. And welcome to our Serious Brandy second interview. We are here today with Copper and Kings founder, Joe Heron, who it's really a pleasure to have you, Joe. Thank you so much. You're one of the big innovators in American brandy. And so I'm really excited to talk to you, have a conversation for a little while. Thanks so much.
We were talking earlier on, Steve, about the Spirits Journal blog, but I would also always read Serious Eats. There was also something that I would like, as someone new to the industry and new to the category and new to all of that would go in and read, your reviews, and it was cool. So it's kind of nice.
Recent Eats, my old blog you're talking about.
Yeah. Was it Recent Eats, not Serious Eats? Recent Eats. That's it. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So
I miss those. It gets to be a lot. I've written a blog myself, and man, it gets to be a lot of work, a lot more work than you think.
That's why I don't do it anymore.
Exactly.
Anyway. So let's get started with some background. Now you're originally from South Africa. How did you get to be the Kentucky brandy guy?
We took the wrong turn. We went left and then it went right. So I left South Africa with my wife Les and our two kids a long time ago, 1995, and we moved to England. And I was with Bristol Myers in those days, the pharmaceutical company, and then joined Novartis and worked for them in the UK and then in Sweden. And then they moved us to Minneapolis to run the medical nutrition business for Novartis, so nutrition for sick people. And then while in Minneapolis, I left Novartis and started a soda company with health benefits. And everybody was launching Red Bull knockoffs every day, literally every single day. There would be taste better than Red Bull kind of soda that would come out. And we launched a soda with health benefits called Nutri-Soda. And then Pepsi Americas bought that because miracles sometimes happen. And during that, we were kind of having a barbecue outside, and a friend asked me if I drank cider, hard cider. And I went, no, Scott, I don't drink cider. It's too sweet. He said, in the UK, we're drinking it over ice. And I knew intuitively that was going to be a good idea because that would, take cider to another place. And we launched Crispin, and Miller Coors, luckily and fortunately, bought that from us. And while we were doing Crispin, there was always a little idea to do apple brandy because you're making apple wine. And so the extrapolation beyond apple wine is you distill it to apple brandy. But we never, ever got to grips with Crispin's growth, so it never came to the table. And then later on, we kind of, I guess serial entrepreneurs, which is a horrible word, but we thought it was a good idea to try and catch lightning in a bottle 3 times, which is pretty difficult, and looked at brandy as a category. And during that time, we had launched Nutri-Soda with a friend called Dave Defoe, who owns a flavor development company called Flavorman. And Dave was with us with Nutri-Soda and Crispin, and he had invested in Crispin and used some of that money to start a distilling education school called Moonshine University. And they bought some stills from Vendome, and he suggested we come down and just do some pilot distillations of copper pot distilled brandy in his place for free. And we thought that was a good idea. We liked Louisville. And then one day, we were looking up, the logic of brandy distillation is you go to where the fruit is. That's typical around the world. And we were looking in Portland, Oregon, very hard, in Tacoma, Washington. Those were the 2 places that we had kind of really looked at. And actually, had put in an offer and a deposit on a piece of land on the Foss Waterway in Tacoma, looking back up at the city. Really quite pretty, but as it turned out, there were some huge challenges there that made it impossible. One being the city were extremely intransigent on supporting any startup business, and the fire department were demanding that we build them parking lots and sidewalks. They refused to indemnify any kind of pollution issues in the Foss Waterway, of which there were significant problems, and we pulled out of that. That building, by the way, is still undeveloped, and we were just doing some distillations in Louisville, and Dave said, "Why don't you come to Louisville?" And we're like, "Bourbon, Kentucky, why would we ever go to Louisville?" It turns out that there's a very long history of actually brandy distillation and aggregation in Kentucky, in Louisville specifically. Really a long history. The belt from Evansville, Indiana, all the way through Ohio was an apple producing belt, for a long time. And so there was a huge history, and we started to look at that. I mean, in the late 1800s, there were over 400 brandy distilleries in Kentucky. And so, that kind of gave some heritage and credentials. And then obviously logistics are different. The Oakley tanker, refrigerated tanker, makes things quite easily. And also when you look at it, just practically, so we're quite supply chain focused, producing, and up west, up in Oregon and Washington, the fruit is very expensive. This we didn't know, so we dodged a bullet when we didn't get it, but the fruit is really expensive. And it takes 5 tons of grapes to make 1 barrel, 150-gallon barrel of brandy. So when you look at what are the constraints to American brandy, one of them is not the availability of fruit, because it's available, but the cost of the fruit and the weight, how much fruit you can get. It's more for apples if you do single strength without chaptalization, adding sugar to feed the yeast. So when we looked at it, actually, it might have not been the most logical decision. It was the smartest decision that we made, was coming to Louisville. 76% of brandy and cognac in America is drunk east, Central Time Zone East, not West.
Now, going back to Crispin, did you distill cider for that, or were you buying cider and bottling?
No, we would ferment. So the reason that we ended up in a little town called Colfax, California, was we were really interested in the concept of cider from fresh pressed apple juice. Okay, and whereas if you look at Woodchuck or Strongbow or those, they are all fermented apple juice concentrate. And so we were looking for somebody that could help us make cider from fresh pressed apple juice. So we moved to Colfax out there. You get the apple juice, which is usually coming down from Washington or Oregon, most of it, because I think it's 85% of all apples and 95% of all pears are from Washington and Oregon, America. So it's a lot. So you get the juice, and then we would ferment on site and do it there.
So you were brewing the cider, though. You were making the cider.
Yeah, cider making is wine making. You're making it from fruit. Brewing is for grains.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you opened Copper Kings, and you made a decision to both. Did you make the decision early to both source and distill? How did that model come about?
Well, I've told this story quite often recently, because a lot of the newer craft distilleries are like, one, either considering the sourcing model or how to do it. It's when we looked at it and we had got our bright, shiny Vendome stills and we're filled with pride, joy, optimism, and hope, and then quickly realized that, in the US, people have no idea what eau de vie is. They don't know what it is, and are not really very predisposed to unaged brandy. It's just not a category that has ever managed to gain traction. And that's when we realized that the business model and the business would need some kind of aging. And so what we did was we literally started Rolodexing the ADI kind of directory and looking for who would make that. We were always going to make and distill our own brandy. Otherwise, why would we buy the stills? It would have been much fucking cheaper to just source. But we had very specific ideas on what the brandy was going to be, and that was going to be, copper pot distilled, non-chill filtered, unadulterated, and to do that, we were going to do it. But we sourced brandy from it's probably about 7 states, both grape and apple. Less apple is just less apple brandy, and what we did was the first product that we sold was sourced. I mean, we didn't have any aged brandy that we'd made ourselves. That would take 4-5 years to get there. But each year we would do kind of a giant Solera of putting old into new, new into old, old into new, and working it backwards until we got to scale. And that took us about probably just closer to 5 than to 4. But we would never release anything at less than 4 years old.
And you said you went to the ADI list. That's the American Distilling Institute, right?
Yes.
And did you say you did? Did you tell me earlier you did an advertisement too in one of their?
We didn't. We didn't. I mean, there's just not that many. You didn't need to. There's just not that many people that make pot still brandy.
And what was I mean, no one was for the most part sourcing brandy this time. What kind of reaction did you get from people when you said, "Hey, I want to buy brandy from you"?
Honestly, great. I think I've told the story that I think it was up in Idaho. The distiller up there said, "You want to buy my 10-year-old brandy? Fuck yeah! No one drinks brandy in America. Do you want the barrels?" And we said, "Sure. What are the barrels?" And he said, "They're cognac barrels." So we got these big cognac barrels with 10-year-old brandy in it, and it was that fortuitous kind of moment. You would get some pretty average brandy, some pretty good brandy, but every now and then you'd get pockets that were really exceptional that would take that blend further. And what we did was we took all the brandy we could find and we put them in bourbon barrels and stored them maybe for probably 6 months, maybe a little more, I can't remember. And then, built the distillery, and used that, and we called that DNA 1. And so DNA 1 was what first went into a bottle, and then we'd iterate beyond that, DNA 1.5, DNA 1.75, and then we got to 2. And eventually, I mean, we were up to, say, DNA 9 now. I'd say that's where we are now. And that's, for the last 4 years, 5 years, pretty much 100% of the brandy's ours. And it's very different to when it started. I mean, we have a very specific blend. We call it the Alliance blend, which is Muscat, Chenin Blanc, and French Colombard. And they have very specific roles. They're all classic brandy grapes from years. They're all very, very aromatic. They're all acidic as you need. But Muscat is your voluptuous aromatic brandy, and then Chenin is very elegant and sophisticated and adds depth to your aging profile, and then Colombard adds brightness and pop. And I think you're going to see far more Colombard in Cognac and Armagnac going forward. It's a little bit more heat tolerant, so that's very helpful too.
So when you started, you said you got brandy from 7 states. How many producers did you buy from?
Probably about 10 in total. There's just not that, especially then there weren't that many brandy producers. So, it was really more pocketed depending on where they were. Some bigger than others, some no longer, in existence as what they were. 7 years is a long time. Huh?
Were any of them the large commercial producers, or were they mostly smaller?
We've got some from a larger commercial producer that had what we wanted in terms of grapes, but mostly they were smaller. But I'd say, a little bit of both. But what is a large commercial producer? They're not really an MGP, type of scale of pot still brandy.
There's some of the California producers, right, that have larger.
Yeah,
Christian Brothers pot still.
Everybody, and in those days, we were looking for pot still brandy, so we would try and get from anybody who had it.
And are you still buying, or are you relying on what you got?
We would if we could find older brandy, that was either not so much to build. It's like the older pear brandy that we found, which we felt was a beautiful illustration of distillation, of American distillation, and we were going to wave that flag. Obviously we hadn't distilled it, but for us to buy brandy that's less than 5 years old, I don't even think we'd do that. And we have enough brandy now, but we don't ever have any. We were very transparent that we source brandy. It's math. If you're selling aged brandy and you're only a year old, where did it come from? Magic?
And what made you decide you had to go with pot still brandy?
I think that there is brandy is quite different to making whiskey. Whiskey you muscle into shape. Brandy you stroke into shape. It's a different process. And we wanted, despite not being a traditional brandy brand, we're quite traditional in our distillation process. So if you look at our stills, they would not look out of place in cognac. They're typical Charente style stills, especially the helmet. I think where they're different is that a Vendome pot has very big shoulders, which gives you good reflux, which gives you more intensity. So for us, we're very fond of those stills. And but brandy, to our mind, would enable us to be premium, brandy versus cheap and sweet California pot still brandy. The tool and the technique would enable more intensity and richness and fruit nuance and retention of the nuance. So whiskey is a process of extraction and purification. Your base material, grains, don't actually taste that good until they're either neutral or been in a barrel. That's where we get. Brandy is one of the few distillation processes which flips that on its head. It's about retention and concentration, and you're trying to retain and concentrate the fruit. That's your ambition. And a pot still is a tool of intensity. A column is a tool of efficiency.
You mentioned the grapes. You mentioned Muscat, Chenin Blanc, and Colombard. Are those what you're using in the brandy you're distilling?
Yeah, well? That's what we call our Alliance blend.
And where do you get the?
All from California. They all come from California. There's nowhere really that has enough fruit scale and certainly fruit cost other than California. So they all come out of the Central Valley. So you get Muscat and Colombard primarily out of the Central Valley. Chenin is usually more Central Coast. Our big fear in life is that Chenin Blanc becomes a celebrated table wine as it is around the world, because then we're fucked. So that's, I'm South African, so Colombard and Chenin Blanc are essentially the backbone of the whole brandy industry in South Africa. So we were, as a reference point to our heritage, a little bit more interested in Chenin for that reason. Funny enough, Muscat's got really quite expensive as people are pulling out the vines to plant almonds. So that's another challenge with great farming and wine making and distilling overall, if the Central Valley is part of your sourcing strategy, you're competing even with kiwi fruit. I mean, you can grow anything if you can get enough water in the Central Valley.
Yeah, the water is a problem there in the future.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and do you make the wine?
We make the wine all at source. So we make the wine so that you can distill on the lees. So we don't, and so we just, so the apple wine comes down from Michigan, again in these big Oakley tankers, pear wine out of Oregon, and grapes out of California. And then we've had some peach, but peach is quite difficult to source wine, because if you start as a brandy distiller, the first conversation is fruit, the second conversation is fermentation. So, and that's, how do you do that? Where do you do that? So we ferment at the fruit source.
Okay, so you're fermenting in California, in
Yeah.
Michigan, in Oregon.
And then we don't, so we're an urban distillery, we're downtown. We don't have any, issues with waste and spent grain and stuff going down the drain. So we're quite fortunate in that. That's something that's kind of helpful, actually.
And just to be clear, when you say you ferment, are you essentially buying the wine, or are you involved in the winemaking process?
We buy the wine and we're involved in the winemaking process. So we have very specific protocols for winemaking. So firstly, the yeast that we use. Typically, grape wine, which is, we use a yeast called Prie de Mousse, which is a very classic winemaking yeast that's very, alcohol tolerant. And so with our apple and our pear, we use a different yeast, which is, gives us more aromatics. It's a little bit more sensitive, but there are more aromatics out of it. And then we ferment very cold. So we ferment around about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a long fermentation process, but you don't blow out your volatiles out the roof of your tank by going and fermenting cold.
And so this is essentially, winemakers are doing this to your specification.
Yeah, but we have a winemaker, as Brandon O'Daniel, our master distiller, was a winemaker before a distiller. So he's intensely involved in that process and then they make to specs.
And you mentioned apple and peach. What are you doing with the peach?
Everybody's interested in that. We're experimenting. I'd say that we're a way off on pear and peach from really feeling like we've mastered it. The peach, we're getting the juices harder. Getting it with the fruit intensity when it's juice is not the same. It's a little lighter. So we have had a number of experiments going on. Dave Wondrich has tasted our stuff. I'm not sure if Nicholas Pelosi has. A friend of ours in Texas, Morgan Weber, has. The thing what people don't understand, maturation is a lot of timing involved in maturation. One, sometimes with peach and pear, just a little bit of maturation is actually really, really great. And then after your first year, it's not great. It turns in, it changes. It changes over time a lot, especially in the beginning. The first 12 months and the first 2 years are quite volatile in terms of the profile. They change a lot. So right now, peach would be the furthest away on our radar because we're finding it hard to make great peach wine and make wine that when you distill it is full of character. The same goes.
Yeah, peach is interesting because I mean, you mentioned Dave Wondrich. I mean, he wrote an article about how in the 19th century, peach brandy was huge, and it's essentially non-existent now in the United States.
It is.
So.
It is. And it's all an agricultural process. If you buy grape wine, it's easy peasy. You can buy it. I mean, we find it very easy to buy apple wine. We know where to get it, how to get it. Pear wine is our struggle is, and I think Dave Smith really pulls this off at St. George, they really retain the essence of that pear, and we've struggled to get that essence of the pear. Because you make pear brandy, it needs to smell and taste like a pear, and that's the reason. And then peach is even harder, just because of finding wine, and then finding fermentation capacity.
I've heard that repeatedly from fruit brandy producers, that getting from non-grapes, that getting the essence of the apple or the pear into the distillate is really difficult. Why is that? And are there ways you can sort of manipulate the aging to increase the sort of fruit presence?
Well, I think firstly it's fermentation. So how do you ferment that you retain as much fruit within the wine? And it's a little like brewers whiskey, where you don't drink the brewer's whiskey, but with wine that you are going to distill, it's gritty. Ours is bitty, so you try and leave as much of the kind of essence of that fruit in. So it's dark and gritty with bits and pieces in it. And then I think you get to distillation. Obviously, a pot still it's less hot. You don't extract. We only do a double distillation. So your low wine always smells the best, by the way. It's just beautiful. You just would not be able to make money out of it. But a double distillation, the extraction is less. You don't get to a proof level that's that high, so it's about 130 to 140. So you're trying to keep as much in. And when you get to, so that's your eau de vie, and it should taste close to what the fruit is if you've done your job well. Our immature brandy is the legal term for grape eau de vie. Is very muscatty driven. It's got a good grapey aromatic to it, a little bit like a full body pisco in some ways, a rich pisco. Unaged apple brandy is crisper. It has less sugar in it. We don't have the opportunities in the main to do heirloom cider apples, so you're buying juice very specifically at specific sugar levels and acidity levels that enable the culinary apple to do the work that a typical heirloom cider apple would do. We've distilled heirloom cider apple quite a bit. I have a good friend who has a fantastic cidery up in Michigan called Vandermill, and we've partnered with him on some heirloom cider wine, which is exciting, but takes a long time. My friend Dan Farber will tell you, for apple brandy to mature into a deep apple note, to take 20 years.
That's Dan Farber from Osakalis.
Yeah, and Dan thinks that's perfectly normal and acceptable. So,
are you planning long aging any of those brandies? Are you looking at 15, 20-year-olds saving?
I would say that's just would become unlikely at any scale, because it takes a huge amount of money, and you're just trying to stay alive. And so, no, I mean, do we have brandy that's older than 6 years old? Yeah, we have some. And are we intending to let it run? Yeah, we will. But mostly, I would say we're trying to operate within a framework that's less than that.
Are there any other fruit brandies you're working on? You mentioned peach, pear, apple, and of course the grape.
That's all for us that we work on. We probably a little more interested in using brandy technique in different mediums like gin, and using the brandy technique to of double distillation, no chill filtration, to make very smooth aromatic gins. It's not the cheapest way of making gin. The cheapest way of making gin is to get grain neutral spirits and flavor it or redistill it. We don't do that.
For your grape brandies now, is what you have now the DNA you have now? What number are you on, by the way?
So in a bottle, we're probably at DNA 5 or 6, but we're probably at 9, maybe a little bit more than that.
And these are now a combination of sourced and distilled?
No, I mean,
And also-
after DNA 3, they all became our own.
Oh, they're all wholly yours now?
Yeah, they're all pretty much ours. Yeah.
Is that true of your apple too?
Apple even before, because there was
Okay.
less apple to source. I mean, great, yeah. So overall, so yeah.
And now you've done a lot of experiments with finishing too, right? You've done beer and tequila and all manner of different types of beer finishings.
Yeah.
Do you have more of that planned going forward?
I think that, excuse the pun, is part of our DNA. I mean, is how do you have a conversation with a brandy drinker and a whiskey drinker that shows an inventive side to brandy? Because brandy has been quite hidebound either by its heritage or by its price points. So you know, until we came along, there's very little innovation in brandy at all, and very little positioning around innovation as a tool. So we have, you know, more opportunity, although the TTB cola process is extremely arduous in terms of barrel finishing. It's really, really challenging. And so, you know, brandy is quite a promiscuous spirit. It takes on flavor very, very easily and very quickly. And that's why you have to be quite careful on your medium. And we would talk about, you know, wood a lot. I mean, we're obviously, not obviously, but our predilection is towards American oak. We feel like American oak, in terms of molecular structure, with more lactones, gives more honey, more caramel, more tones. The coopering strategy of toast and char versus just toast, no char, gives you an oxidization profile that we like. And when it gets to finishing, it gets quite interesting because, one, the beer finishes are super interesting, and they can change a lot across the beers, and you're trying to, you know, be true to that beer. And you know, stouts and imperial stouts are quite easy for that. I mean, we've done Dark Lord, Narwhal, and things like that from Sierra Nevada. The brewery have some fantastic stuff, actually. So beer is good. I would say where we are shining more is using whiskey, you know, from Kentucky distilleries, and so we've done a lot of that, and it helps us have a conversation about American brandy that's not living within the confines of a certain dogma. It's much more expansive in terms of opportunity to use that. And you know, when we started, there were no references to bourbon barrels across cognac at all, and now the many.
Did you say the initial aging for your brandy goes into toasted oak? Is that?
So the initial aging of our brandy would always be in a bourbon barrel. Okay, so that's it. So the bourbon barrel is actually almost the perfect maturation vessel for brandy, because it's had some of the power has been taken out of that American oak by the whiskey, and so it's a gentler medium. We live in Kentucky, and so we are fortunate to get a very juicy barrel, and our intention is to, you know, extract some of that whiskey tonality into our brandy, and so we do that in 2 ways: using a bourbon barrel, but also a little bit of new American oak for a period of time to give color and that richness of the caramel from that.
You put it in the new American oak first and then transfer it to the bourbon
It's a
barrel?
blend. We have, it's a blend. So it's usually about 15% for our, you know, classic American brandy. For Butchertown, it's about 25%, and we do those in 4-barrel batches. So 3 bourbon, 1 new American oak.
And where do you get your barrels, both your new and your bourbon barrels?
So the bourbon barrels come from all over. They can come from wild turkey. They can come from Heaven Hill. We like Heaven Hill barrels a lot. We get some nice Knob Creek barrels now. We have a good friendship down there, and so we're enjoying that. And then all of our New American oak barrels and all of our kind of innovation barrels come from Calvin Cooperage, and we have a really close friendship with them. And they'll do things. We have you'll have to pronounce this like me. It's called a zebra barrel to everyone else, where we have alternating staves of New American oak and bourbon barrels with Chardonnay heads, and we got those from Calvin, or little mini barrels with different heads, because your heads give you 30% of your volume. It's a lot.
Calvin Cooperage is right there in Louisville, right?
Yeah.
Do you find does the difference in bourbon distillery, is it significant enough to make a difference in the brandy? Can you tell, is there a difference between a brandy that you've aged in a Knob Creek barrel versus a Heaven Hill barrel versus a Wild Turkey barrel?
There is very early on, and you'd get a little bit more spice out of Wild Turkey. You get a richness out of Knob Creek that is unusual. Heaven Hill tend to have very rich kind of whiskeys that we like that too, and that's also a bit more similar. If you did wheated, you get a lot more softness on the finish. If you do more rye heavy, they get a little bit more spicy.
Have you done all of those, wheated, rye?
Yeah, we have.
Have you done rye whiskey barrels too?
A lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we kind of, I would say we lean more to rye. I think the fruit notes of rye that you get and brandy are very complementary, and we like those finishes too. When we do finishes with, we've done with Paul Aletko at Few, we've done some really great brandy. With Peerless, we've done some great brandy. We have some Catoctin Creek barrels that we're quite excited about as well. So we like rye.
And so what else do you have coming? Like, what are you thinking about for the future? Like what you've been really innovative. What do you have planned, and what's sort of in your head swirling around as possible new things to work on?
So this is the question you asked Nicholas, isn't it? What's in the dark cave below?
Yeah, we want you to give us the secret information.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to. One of the things that we did earlier on was we were quite, in love with different kinds of wood mediums. So we bought port pipes, port barrels, port casks, and put pure muscat in them, and literally hated them. It's like we didn't buy any more after this. And every year we would ask ourselves, what should we do with this? And we'd have conversation about vermouth or aperitivos or different things. What are we going to do with this? 6 years later, they are magnificent. So they are really, really quite something. So that's kind of exciting. That I think is going to be something very, very special. When we first started, we had an experiment of muscat in wine barrel size, so 60 gallons, with no char, and one with just a very light char, and that's going to be the 10th anniversary release. So that's in 4 years' time, and I think that's going to be cool. Probably one of the most exciting things we ever did. So we made our version of a Pinot de Charente, a Mistel. This is about 5 years ago, and aged it for a year, and then panicked and said nobody in America drinks aperitifs. They drink beer, wine, rosé, or cocktails. So So we actually distilled that and put it back in those Mistel barrels. And that's ridiculous. I mean, they were really ridiculous. I mean, it's so unusual.
So back up a second here and let me follow. So Pinot de Shiraz, people don't know, is usually a combination of grape juice and brandy, essentially, right? It's a sweet.
So you get unfermented grape juice and you add in about, call it a third of eau de vie, unaged brandy, and then you age it. And so we had an idea for a Kentucky Mistel, Kentucky Pinot, and after, I think it was a little bit more than 15, 16 months, we just didn't think anybody would buy it. So we distilled it and put it back in those barrels. And those barrels are hugely, sugared. They have a ton of sugar in them. And so that's nearly 4 years old now. I think that's going to be pretty awesome. We stole an idea from Maggie Campbell up at Privateer for rum of distilling the Queen's Cut, which is you take the tails and you redistill the tails. And we have some barrels of that brandy, which is cool. Probably our most ambitious project is distilled red wine. And so we've distilled Zinfandel, and it's aging in Zinfandel barrels, and we've distilled Shiraz, and it's aging in Shiraz barrels. And that's a very different process because it's a little like making champagne. You don't want, you want as little skin contact as possible, because if your process is about retention and concentration, you're going to retain and concentrate all the tannins that exist in the skin. So and so and there's less, they're much less acidic than white wine, than white grapes. So those are turning into very soft, sexy brandies, but they're in French oak, so it'll take longer. And I think that's something for anyone who might be watching or listening is there is a difference in maturation is important. So if you're maturing something in Scotland, it's very different to maturing something in Kentucky, based in that instance just on climate. If you're making brandy in France, you're using French oak in a cooler, much cooler climate, much more temperate climate, whereas we're using American oak in a much more kind of warmer climate. And so it's a little like you don't compare Cavalan to Springbank. They're different. They're not the same. Amrut and Nika are not the same because they're not from Scotland. So your maturation environment, your maturation tools are very, very different. And that's a consideration, on profiling.
And those Zinfandel, that's really interesting. The Zinfandel in Syrah casks, how old are they right now?
18 months.
And what do you think?
I tell you what, maturation is a bitch. It just kills me. For someone with so little patience, how I ever started this, I don't know. I would say that's going to take 6 years. They're in French oak. French oak is you need more time.
And are those in casks you got? Are those in cognac or Armagnac casks?
No, they're in wine barrels. They're in wine barrels and Shiraz wine barrels.
And so how large are those? What size are those?
60 gallons.
Okay. Well, I will look forward. That's a very interesting sounding.
It is. I mean, those are the things that, the scope and expansiveness of our country. We're going for a pretty tough time overall, politically and, with the pandemic. We do have an expansiveness in terms of imagination that's very different to the rest of the world. There's a lot of opportunity to be inventive, and I'm excited by that. I think that's going to drive something really, really, really spectacularly.
It's interesting. One thing that I've talked to a lot of brandy producers who have told me, I've asked about, doing single barrel brandies, and a lot of them have said, well, we don't really like to do single barrels. We prefer to blend it. It's hard to do single barrels. Do you have an opinion on doing? I know you mostly what you do is blend, but do you have a opinion one way or the other on doing single barrel releases?
Fuck yeah, we love single barrels. Yeah, I mean the single barrel. The whole point to a single barrel is the differentiated and the distinctive expressiveness of that barrel. So what if you want to have a uniformly kind of predictable brandy, then you want to blend. We don't do that. We sell, but we have Total Wine have bought a lot of barrels. Tippins have bought a ton up in Michigan, Bevmo in California, Benny's in Chicago. We have even Lincoln Road down in Alabama. Yeah, single barrels are, I think, special. Then they're difficult because you're literally bottling a single barrel, so the labor and the bottling and all of that's not efficient. But the character is superb in every one. So you asked the question about a wheated style. I mean, we have a bourbon club, that gave us 2 Wild Turkey barrels that have been there for almost 3 years. That's going to be really, really nice and interesting. So yeah, the logic of we want to blend, that's because you want your brandy to taste the same all the time. We want people to explore brandy. We want people to have adventures with it, beyond just the norm. And I've had Nicholas has shared single barrels with me. David OG has shared some of the stuff that they get, and
David from K&L Wines in California.
Yeah, and I would say if anybody, they've done a more than most to spearhead the adventure of brandy from around the world. I mean, I owe them a debt of gratitude from a long time ago. So yeah, no, single barrels are great. I think the one thing I would say that people are a little confused in about single barrels is proof. Okay, so if you're getting something that's 124 plus proof, that means you're going to dilute it. Otherwise, you're drinking a shit ton of ethanol. So people don't really understand that cask strength is a bespoke tool of libation. What you're trying to do is tailor it to your own taste. And some people like to kind of try it at that cask strength because it's very true to the spirit. It can't be more true. It's what it is. But if you're doing that, you have to let the ethanol float off. So you got to open it up and let it fly. In fact, I'd recommend anybody that's tasting room temperature, like ambient temperature spirits, to open it up. You got to let the ethanol float. But secondly, to us, one of the things about chill filtration is what you're doing with chill filtration is you take the spirit down to 0 Celsius, to 32 Fahrenheit. It causes the oils within the spirit to bind, and then you extract those. And so that you don't get any floaties, it's very predictable, but you've extracted, in brandy terms, a huge amount of what you were trying to work to keep in. Now, when you get a single barrel or something like that, you really should either add a little bit of chilled waters, which as the Scots will say, you got to let it bloom. I don't have the accent for that, but they call it let it bloom by causing those oils in the single malts to coagulate, and that changes your aromatic. Even over a little bit of good ice, that's fine. But just drinking it like neat, warm, at cask strength, yeah, you got to have Superman for a tongue. Seriously. You
don't chill filter your brandies, do you, or do you?
No, we've never chill filtered any of our brandies or our gins or anything. Our ambition is to keep that intensity within the spirit. So no adulteration.
So I'm going to go a little bigger picture for a minute. So when you opened up a brandy distillery in Louisville, what was the reaction in the brandy world and then in the bourbon world in Kentucky?
You know, it's a good question. You know, I think that when we saw what happened was, because we had a distillery and we were authentic and we were ambitious to make great spirits, in Kentucky they were quite, you know, open to that, much more open to it than people. I mean, this is certainly Louisville, but you know, specifically is a town that drinks good scotch, good rum, good tequila. You know, it's quite agnostic. It's obviously, you know, bourbon centric. I mean, and that's so. Actually, you know, Kentucky has always been a great market for us. We also have the ability to showcase it so people can visit and understand it more. But the profile that we do of brandy is quite familiar and approachable to a whiskey drinker and enjoyable. So we've never had an issue with that. I think that outside of Kentucky, I think that, you know, the adventurous whiskey drinkers have always been our core. We probably sell more brandy to whiskey drinkers than we sell to E&J drinkers. You know, we really do. So that's always been fine. I mean, the Houston Bourbon Society is probably one of our biggest champions, and they're in Texas, and they're magnificent. And I think as a group of people looking for stuff, that's great. San Francisco Bourbon Society is also great. So we've been well accepted. Where I think, you know, people would question us might be, you know, is the California cheap and sweet drinker going to trade up? And we do see that. And we have always had a strategy for that trade up to happen. That's why we exist in a lot of ways. I think the cognac drinker, and I'm not talking about VS cognac, the VS drinker and the California cheap and sweet drinker are drinking the same type of sweet brandy. And we don't play in that profile at all. So I think overall I think people see us as imaginative and inventive. I think the fact that we have a distillery, we have probably one of the great talents in distillation in Brandon O'Daniel, and he is really a significant talent. This is a guy that took 3 sentences of a medieval gin recipe and made it. You know? Sort of with a lot of bad language, but he made it. So he's a very significant talent. So yeah, I mean, it's I think we've always stood up and stood proud, and I think brandy aficionados are proud that somebody's standing up for brandy, because it took that. The brandy conversation was very, very limited until we came.
That's especially the American premium brandy.
Yeah.
I mean, there was, you know, Germain Raban, there's Osacalis is very small. So you guys have had a huge impact on American brandy.
Yeah, and people talk about brandy. I mean, there was no such thing as American brandy until we came. Nobody ever was either California or cognac.
What are your best markets? Where is Copper and Kings being really selling?
You know, our best markets are, you know, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan is starting to do very well since a change in distributorship up there. California is very big because of its scale, and so those are our biggest markets. But we have, you know, strong markets on the East Coast as well. DC, I think Florida was the one market we went and lost, and that's looking super promising. And then Kentucky obviously is within that as well.
Do you export?
No, we don't. We haven't even got to grips with America, let alone export. I think export can be, unless you're at very significant scale, you're a Brown-Forman or you're a Diageo or something like that. It's more of a a vanity project. And I don't mean that to be as disparaging as it sounds, but it's a project to get your brand out on a global scale and say something like that. But it's from a profitability point of view, it sucks. Every time we look at it, because we get asked from Europe, we get asked, Canada, Australia, and it's like, oh, this sounds like a lot of work. But does it intrigue me from my ego? Fuck yeah, it does.
So let me share my fear with you
Yeah.
about Copper and Kings, because we've seen this happen before. In whiskey, small company breaks out, they're doing amazing. We love their stuff. They get big, boom, one of the big boys comes, buys them. They keep the head distiller or the owner on for 5 years under contract. For 5 years, it's great. After that, it becomes just another label in a big corporation. You're a great businessman. You've done this with soda and cider. I guess the question is, are you in this for the long haul? I'm sure you're having people call and
Constellation are our biggest shareholder other than me and Leslie. So the one challenge especially now is, the money is significant for the long-term trajectory. The investment levels are really, really high. It's much bigger, than anyone realizes. And so, can we get to where we need to be? Probably not, Steve. I don't think so. Have we done what are we realizing our own ambitions? I think we are. I think we're true to what we do. But I'm not sure that individuals can really get to any sense of scale anymore. Especially, the pandemic. What's happened in the pandemic is that you've seen, what I call the flight to familiar. So the trajectory of brands that are built on-premise and distilleries, I would say like Nicholas Palazzi and me and other places, that's becoming really difficult because people are going to supermarkets and buying a shit ton of Tito's, or stuff that's kind of really value driven, as well as large format, and we're just not in that game. So the financial implications of the pandemic are difficult for us, and it's much more about survival now than it's ever been. It's really, the rug got pulled right out from underneath us. This is 8 weeks, and if you're putting away, and it's millions of dollars in inventory that gets taxed, you have to have big money, really. And if anybody is wanting to start a craft distillery, I'd caution them, because that's why you see a lot of gin distilleries starting, because you can sell stuff quickly. I wish I had started gin before, because we stumbled on a very unique gin style, which we didn't know how we were going to do it. But so, are we going to sell? I'd say that there is a time that we are likely to sell, simply because we don't have enough money on a personal level to take it to the next level, to keep funding it. It's just bigger than, if cider or craft beer, you can make and sell theoretically within a week. It's run and it's done. If you're putting stuff away for 4 years, maintaining a distillery, that capital is a lot, and it would take a huge acceleration, of cash flow for us to really have enough money to do it forever. And I think, the trick is to not be a bullshit artist. And I think there are people, someone like Dan is just Dan, that's it. And his brandy is exceptional, a very classical style, and beautiful. But he's a one-man show in the main.
You're talking to Dan Farber at Osacalis again.
Yeah, I was just using him. I mean, I think, you see, Clare Creek is now part of Hood River. They had they went to deeper pockets. St. George, make less and less brandy. They make more whiskey than they used to. A lot of vodka. Who knows? And but financially, I would tell you, it's a big ask. And we have, right now we have maybe 6,000 barrels of brandy aging. That's a lot of money that you put down for 4 years to sit it down. So, and that's when, fundamentally you get your business, and I don't know when on-premise is coming back. I don't think anybody does. How many people are going to want to do a distillery tour or host an event at Copper and Kings or go to our bar? We're concerned.
You're still producing though, during the pandemic?
Yeah. So right now, at the distillery, I work from home, and we have, 5 people in the distillery: bottling, distilling, shipping, just the more operation side.
How is that compared to when you're just the distillery itself, not the other things, when it's sort of full bore before the pandemic? How many people would you have had?
Well, we'd have 10 people working in the restaurant and bar. We'd have 10, 5, 6 people working on tours, maybe more. We have a whole events team. So yeah, a lot more people.
Would you have more people actually doing the distilling work too, or is that
No, we kept our team. That's all we kept going. That was our team. It's essentially a core of 3 production people, and then a floating operations person, and then our finance guy.
Yeah, I think we all hope this is over soon.
Yeah. I mean, it's been I think globally, this is a cultural rift. It's not a moment. This is, this is going to be a big deal. I mean, how much? Anyway, these are whole different conversations. Huh?
It's for a different website.
For a different over a few brandies.
We'll start to close out with a few of the easier questions. Do you have a favorite to drink of the stuff that you make, or of other brandies?
I think with us, we would tell you at Copper and King, Butchertown is probably the go-to. It's super smooth for its proof level. It's great on the rocks. It's great with an expressed orange peel. It makes an incredible Boulevardier, just amazing. It holds up in any cocktail. So Butchertown would be probably the go-to. I really, really like our new, since September, apple brandy, just out straight. It's very aromatic. It's easy to drink in any way you want. And then I'm South African, so I always thought Geography, which was a 50-50 blend of American brandy and South African brandy, that was super cool. And the objective of that was to showcase that New World brandy was quite old school. American brandy since 1640, the first recorded distillation of any spirit in America was brandy, and the first distillation of brandy happened in 1672 in South Africa. So in timeline terms, they're almost twins, and so those are probably my 3 favorites that I like. And
were you a brandy drinker in South Africa?
I was not. I was a Scotch drinker. So I mean, in all honesty, I'm not a huge fan of how South African brandy is delivered. It's either very cheap, and it's done in a certain way, or if they do it pure pot still, it's 76 proof, 38% ABV, and I'm like, that's worthless. Why would you ever do that? So it's too too weak for me. They're very proud of their history and heritage, and win a lot of awards. But I'm much more of an American brandy stylistic drinker, or a Scott. I like intensity. I like, a much more adventurous style of drink. So.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Butchertown. I mean, I still remember the first time I tried. I mean, I think it was at the recommendation of one of the Davids at K&L, tried Butchertown, and how I thought, wow, this is something new in American brandy that is, different from anything out there. It's strong, It's bold, it's fantastic, and it really was a revelation. And you guys have really, lived up to that and done an amazing job in the brandy world.
Again, I think people, if they understand that if you see high proof, do some sort of dilution to your own bespoke taste, what you want it to taste like. But I love that caramel honey that you get within the power. I mean, I'd say it's the fist in the velvet glove. It's really velvety, very, very potent. And it really was intended to be the signature moment that said, we make American brandy. Don't fence us in. We're going to do brandy how we want to do it, and not be dictated by the dogma of tradition in any coast or continent. So
great. Well, Joe, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate you joining us and joining everyone on Serious Brandy. And
I appreciate it. I hope there was somebody watching it other than you.
Well, there have been people commenting, and we'll leave it up on the site. And we'll give it to you so you can do what you want with it as well.
And Steve, I mean, thank you for doing this, and to all the serious brandy enthusiasts who I'm friends with, a few of them just outside of this. It's important stuff for brandy as a category to have the evangelists and the disciples and the debaters and the discourse that happens. All of it is healthy and enjoyable. And you've been driving this for a long time. So thanks for having me on.
Labor of love. So
it has to be. Same for me.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe.
All right,
take care and stay safe. And my best wishes to your family, and your workforce.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right.
Bye-bye.